Brilliant. Okay, we'll get started. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming along. As I say, this is the first session, and we're talking about data collection, privacy, and automation on a kind of day-to-day level, and in a way that we think that we hope is going to be useful. Um, and I should say, yeah, we're really happy, really glad to be able to put this on thanks to SIB. And this is for grantees of the YIF program. So a couple of acronyms there, but I think people on the call know what they mean. Um, Great. So we've got four topics that we're talking about today. And it's worth saying this image on the right-hand side is the two-page guide that you'll get along with today's session as well. And you get a link to that through the feedback form as well. So don't worry about taking notes. We'll both share these slides and we've got the most important information that we're talking about today on 2 pages of A4, just because we know you're busy and we hope that that will be helpful. And Zarina and I are going to talk through these different topics. So I'm starting out with some just tips on day-to-day data collection, how to do that in a way that works for your organization. I'll be handing over to Zarina talking about all things GDPR, handling and sharing data safely. I'll talk about how you might want to turn that data into action and how you can use it to kind of help your decision making and make it useful. And then the topic on everyone's lips or lots of people's is AI. And so we're talking a little bit about that at the end. Um, why are we talking about data? It's not just because funders ask for it or because we think it's fun, but we want to come up with systems that will help you to make your work more impactful. And so, yeah, spend less time searching and more time supporting. I should give a bit of background into my society. So we are a registered charity, and we've been going for 23 years now. We make a whole host of services, some of which you might have come across. They work for you. Write to them are some of our democracy services. We make a website called What Do They Know, where you can make freedom of information requests. Fix My Street is a really popular reporting tool for potholes and road issues, things like that. And underneath all of that, we're data nerds. And so what we do day to day is kind of handling all sorts of different kinds of data and hopefully making it useful for people. I should say in advance, I'm not really the expert on loads of data stuff. I'm the chatty one. But if you've got any really technical questions, I'm lucky to have Serena on hand to help us answer them. So yes, I know it's not everybody's favorite subjects, but we think that, and hopefully what we're going to talk today about is just like an approach to data that is kind of manageable, and helps you run your day-to-day life because we know you're all really, really busy. Um, and yeah, I should say, I think I mentioned at the very beginning, we spoke to about 15 different youth organisations in the run up to this to help kind of tailor this programme and tailor what we're talking about today. And I think some of those are on the call, so lovely to see you again, and then some new faces too. So we've tried to make this as relevant as we can to your organisations. But that being said, there was a really broad range of organisations that we spoke to. So please do feel free at any time to say hello in the chat to stop us. And clarify anything. And I think another thing that will make this really helpful is if you tell us your real life experiences and we bring real life examples into this. So please do stop us at any time. I can just talk and talk and talk, and so any reason for me to stop and pause for a minute is a good thing. Great. Okay, so we're starting off with a little poll, which I have loaded in, and I do now need to just press the button to set it going. Um, we want to know how you're feeling about how well you manage your data on the whole. So when someone mentions data to you, what's your kind of reaction? And so the options are we've got it sorted, we're really happy with it, it's mostly under control, could be better, or it keeps me awake at night. And so we'd love to hear where people are at in the room. Um, I hope it's not keeping anyone awake. Oh, it is for somebody. Well, we're here to help. Um, Nice range there. Okay, I'll give it a couple more minutes. Most people have voted. Um, I'll give it one more minute in case anybody else wants to. But the majority of you,
I think the one person who hasn't voted is me. I feel
oh,
like I
okay,
might skew the
great.
results.
Can you all see the results of this? No. Oh, sorry. In that case, I'll explain it to you. Or maybe I can, if I press end poll, will that share it to you? Yes, share results. Hopefully you can see that now. So one person has said that we've got it sorted. So hopefully we'll hear from you throughout today's session and you can tell us what's going really well. Two people mostly under control, three thinking it could be better, and somebody saying it keeps them awake at night. So I think everybody hopefully will learn something today. And yeah, there's no right answer. It's just kind of getting a sense of things. And so everybody is in good company here. Brill. Okie dokie. That's really helpful to kind of set the scene. Um, Again, I mentioned our interviews earlier. We talked about 15 organizations over the last couple of months, and there were some themes that came out of it. We were kind of obviously the focus of what we were talking about was data and how people handle data, but we didn't really get very much feedback on like techie stuff or particular systems. What we heard a lot about was that you were really stretched on time, and that was the key thing that affected how you handled data. And kind of related to that staff capacity, whose job it was, and how they all work together when you're also busy, the relationships at the heart of it, and how you do processing. And systems that don't talk to each other. I remember somebody telling me that they only recently discovered that they were paying for Google Drive and Microsoft and something else, and that none of them talk to each other. And so we're having a little think about that as well. And mostly you just want to support your young people or your users as effectively as possible. And so we're here to find systems that work for you. But as I say, there were a real range of organizations. But those were what chimed with us when we were talking to people about data. If anybody wasn't in the interviews and is here on the call and wants to add anything to like the key things that you think about when you think about data, or about your work in the chat, then we'd love to hear them. But yeah, I think we'll keep on going. This first little section is about making data collection manageable, and here are just some kind of hints and tips that we've put together to kind of help you frame your thinking. And we can get into the details when we get into discussion, maybe. So, this first thing is zooming out and thinking about what is a really good system look like? What would we, in an ideal world, think our system looked like? Um, and I think it's this balance between lightweight and robust, which might sound kind of like oxymorons, but I think that there is a balance here. So we don't want something too lightweight where important information can get lost or that there's separate record keeping going on. Um, but we do want something lightweight enough to that is quick to update when you need it to, and is easy to understand, and it fits into your existing work. So that's what we're wanting for works during busy periods. We've got this sense of like on your busiest week, does it still work? Can you catch up in those half an hour windows that you do have spare? Can your system kind of like keep up with you when you're working really in a really busy way? And that is really, really important because if it's too complicated and you're not going to use it and nobody actually fills in the stuff, then it's not worth the time. But it also needs to be robust. And when we're talking about data, that is important. And so we want information to be stored securely. We want to know who has access to it and how long they have access to it, that your GDPR responsibilities are met. And Zarina is going to give us some really great deep dives into that in a minute. Important things don't get lost, and people know where information lives. That's the other thing. You don't want a black hole of a data system where you put it in and you never see it come out again. Um, and we could get into this, but we did speak to some people who have to put data into council systems and other systems where they're putting data in and they don't see it out the other side. And so I know you don't always have control over your data systems. But yeah, what we're wanting out of a good system, I think, is this idea that we know where the information lives and we know how to get to it. And this sense, which I think we all come across in all parts of our work, that someone else could pick it up if you're away. The hit by a bus problem, although I think that's a morbid way of phrasing it. But yeah, so that's what we're looking for out of a good system. And you may be sitting here thinking, our system does not feel like that right now. And that's okay because we've got some ways to work towards it. But I think it's nice to have a sense that it is possible. And maybe in different jobs and different areas of your life, you've felt like you've come closer to this or further away. But it's nice to have something to aim for. Great. Just checking the chat. Brill. Um, and yeah, it's worth recognizing that nobody starts with a perfect system. And we spoke to lots of people who are still using paper as part of their processes, and that is not necessarily wrong. It's much better to have a paper system that works for you than iPads that never get charged and nobody knows how to use. So yeah, it's worth saying that you can build up over time. So we did speak to an organization who started with a paper register. But then that wasn't quite working or wasn't quite fulfilling their needs. And then they had a spreadsheet, and then they had several spreadsheets. And then in the end, they actually did have someone help them build a system that really worked for them. So it's worth saying that this can be a journey, and you may be at one stage of it. But even then, a really whiz-bang database may not be, your exactly perfect system. If paper is working for you, then that's okay. And fundamentally, the system you have should reflect the work that you do, and it shouldn't really be about having a system imposed on you that then the work has to change around. We're wanting to keep our focus of our delivery and our young people and our users at the heart of this. Um, Brilliant. And again, just taking that more zoomed out approach, I think we want to think about data as more than technology. And so some questions to ask ourselves um, are, do staff understand what data matters and why they're collecting it? What is the point of this in the first place? And I think that's really important. Comes back to that question of what will you do with it once you've collected it? And can you have access to it afterwards? And we spoke to lots of people who said the funders ask us for this, and therefore you have to collect it. Or it ties into certain council programs, or it's helping us make these strategic decisions. Those are all really good reasons to collect data. But just because we always have, that's not a good reason, maybe. So, and I think I know I've certainly been in processes where, especially when you're busy, you want to feel like the reason that the task that you're doing has an endpoint. So the people obviously really matter, and especially when we're talking about youth work and community work. Process is important too, and that's something we're going to talk about today, is like building it into our processes. And so is there a routine for doing this? Because if people's time is allocated up, every minute of their day is allocated and there's not time to do the data processing or the data management, that's a really tricky thing that we want to think about. And does everyone do it in the same way? That's something we're going to talk about. One thing about having a process and a system is people need to have the same understanding about what one session is or what one user is so that we're all talking about the same thing. And then again, coming back to the technology, does the system support the work and is it easy to use? I think that is quite crucial. And we're all at different places on our technology journey. I've just turned 30 and thought I was good at technology and then spent the weekend with my 12-year-old cousin. I'm actually not as good as I thought I was. So yeah, we want it to work for everybody in our team. Great. Do stop me at any point if anybody needs to, but we're just kind of going through some thoughts here and then we can have a little chat as we go through. So, yes, worth thinking about who owns each task because this is a great way to improve kind of consistency and plug any gaps in your data collection. So it may be that the attendance record is the youth workers, they're the right people to capture that in each session. But when it comes to making sure we have parental consent for different activities, and maybe that's the admin person because they can kind of take a zoomed out view across all of the different sessions that go through. These are just examples. Be interested to hear how people do it in their work. Um, Case notes might be somebody who is a key worker who works with somebody over time, but then that monthly review might come to a manager. And so, are you getting the same task being done by the same type of person with the same role, or is it a bit jumbled up? Do people know what their responsibility is? I think it's worth thinking through, yeah, who the owners of different tasks are. And I do think that that is a key way to, yeah, help with your consistency. And then, yeah, we've got the kind of reminder here is that if everyone owns it, then possibly nobody owns it. Somebody has to have a little bit of ownership over each part. Um, and then I think this is a nice kind of practical thinking point here, which is building the data into existing touch points. Because you're so busy, to have it as an add-on or separate makes it really hard to collect. And so how can we build it into the existing kind of workflows? Um, so yeah, the easiest data to collect is the data that's already part of the job and the way that you're doing it. So rather than separate exercises, the existing touch points, those kind of natural opportunities. And again, we're going to get into this a bit more, but when we're talking about data here, some key ones obviously are numbers of people who are showing up, coming to each session. But we also want to think about the kind of qualitative data about what they're experiencing, how they're finding things, what they're getting out of the sessions that you're running. And so conversations that you have with your young people and your users and the case notes that go through that, that is all data too. And that very much is part of the conversation that we're having today. And we want to think about at what points we're collecting these as well. So on that point about the kind of types of information, we can try and match up the type of information with the forms of collection that we're doing. So if it's purely facts about how old they are or when they're coming, I think registration forms are a good way to do that. But experiences, if you want really in-depth, thoughtful feedback from people, don't give them a survey and make them write with a biro when they're, at the end of a session, because that's not a great use of anybody's time. Is there chats and conversations that you can have and then kind of write up your key lessons and learnings afterwards? Can you have small group discussions? Because that is a nicer way, I think, to kind of draw out those more like thoughtful conversations. I know when someone hands me a pen and paper and I'm like running out the door, you're not going to get my best thoughts out of me there. And then another type of information is the judgment of your staff, that like next layer on top of these things, and asking them, okay, you've heard all of these different conversations, you've been running these sessions for a while, what is working and what isn't working? And that's all data too that helps you make your decisions. So we're thinking about ways to collect that that match the type of information that we want to receive. And that also, another kind of factor in that is the kind of pace that that information changes as well. And that comes into the kind of regularity that we want to be asking these questions. And we'll get into that a bit next time, actually, where we're talking about what it makes sense to record on a yearly basis or ask on a yearly basis rather than day to day, because today's session is more about day to day. Um, but things like whether or not they're coming, or how confident they are, their interests, their needs, those change fairly regularly, and it's worth kind of checking in on. But things like date of birth, emergency contact, those might change sometimes, but you can check when they've changed, rather than having to ask, every week, every time. Or things like school, it might be worth doing a little check-in at the start of the school year, that sort of thing. Or you'll know through ages, who's primed to be having new school information. So that's another thing to think about, the regularity that we're seeing change in our information that we're dealing with. Great. Brill. Thanks so much, everybody. This next one is actually from a lovely blog from our chief exec, who's Louise, who's worked at my society a long time now. And this was actually from originally an internal blog post in our work chat, about tips for better spreadsheets. And Louise is brilliant in all sorts of ways, and she's got a great mind for this sort of thing. And I think she put it really clearly. And I've distilled that into this slide here. Most of us have to, work with spreadsheets at some point or another. But I don't remember a good spreadsheet lesson at school. I remember having to be a travel agent for the day or that sort of thing, but not very good tips on spreadsheets. So here are some for you. Um, One piece of information per cell. So we don't want to collect lots of the same sort of thing in one cell, because then it's really hard to organize and sort that information. So we'd want separate columns for name, age, and attendance, as opposed to Sam is 15 and comes on Mondays in one cell. That's not helpful. Very tempting. I'm a big color person. I want to make it look beautiful, but color can be really helpful as a visual guide to help understand your data, but it isn't data itself. And so we're not using just making a cell green to tell us that something is good. The data inside that cell has to say something that we can then tell the spreadsheet to make a different color. Making every column sortable and being consistent with the dates, categories, capitalization, and units that you're using in that column so that you can do things with it. And as part of that as well, thinking about how things will sort. So it's very easy on a spreadsheet to sort by things A to Z, or by low to high. And so A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3 are quite useful categories because they sort in order, whereas high, medium, low will sort high, low, medium in a way that's sometimes less helpful for you to deal with. So that's a nice little tip there. And this is a really good practical one, I think. In most data sets that we work with, there is going to be a case where it's like NA doesn't apply, not sure, person hasn't filled in the form, whatever. Finding one way to say that rather than some people saying NA, some people saying no, some people saying something else means that we can't collect that information together. So find a way to say not recorded and stick to that throughout it. So yeah, I think some good tips there. Zarina, any thoughts on this so far
Yeah,
and
I was just going to pick up on the color one. In
Yes.
case people don't know, you can conditionally color rows in things like Excel and Google Sheets. Some of the spreadsheet wizards on the call might already know that. But yeah, you can color a row based on one of the values in there. You can look up how to do that online, or maybe you can ask an AI to help you do it. I'll cover that in in a bit. But that can be really useful to help you sort of spot trends and outliers and things directly within the spreadsheet can be handy, like without you having to run a graph or a chart or put it into some other piece of software. Getting like a very rough idea as to the shape of your data or what's going on inside it can sort of help you, and can also give you some immediate feedback as data's sort of being filled in over time. But yeah, conditional formatting is like the best thing ever. So
Conditional formatting is brilliant, but we don't want it to just someone going in and doing the
yeah,
double
don't
checker.
go in and fill every
Yeah, I've
every
seen
cell.
people use bold and italics to mean things. People do fun, quirky things with spreadsheets. But yeah, it's nice to do those like formatting things after you've got your data in there, rather than the formatting be the data.
And we should
Um,
we should say the reason we're suggesting this is because it just makes it so much easier to share your data with other people within your organization or outside your organization, or to be able to feed it into different tools. I think the clearer and tidier the data is, and that is easiest to do when you're starting a new data set from scratch, admittedly, rather than picking up an existing one. But it's worth trying to get right as soon as you can, so that then you benefit from it going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Brill. So yeah, some nice tips there, I think. And this next one is a fairly simple one, but again, it's just a good prompt for you to think through, which is giving your data a shared language, which is what do we mean by certain things that we're saying, and does everyone have the same understanding? So for some people, an active volunteer might have attended one session in the last 3 months. For others, it might have been 1 month or 6 weeks, or that might have changed over time. People might just vibe that and decide what they think by it. But it is nice to have shared language because then your data really means something. Same with things like new participant, or what do we mean by attend? So you have to be there the whole thing or just part of it? This might seem basic, but I think it does help make sure that our data is really meaningful. And especially when it comes to funders and funding reports and things, they might have a clear understanding by what they mean by participant and things like that. So it's worth knowing what they think as well. Great. And yeah, a really practical example from my society here, which is templates. Um, if you're not just inputting into a spreadsheet, say, but creating documents as part of your data over and over and over again, it's definitely worth having a template to help you do that. And so, for example, these slides, we have a template slides, but the image that you can see here is actually our template Google Doc that we use when, as a charity, we're asked to sign an open letter. So, for example, Greenpeace might say, we're objecting to this. Would other organisations like to sign it? And then part of my job as the policy person inside my society is to fill in this template, send it round, and see if everybody agrees. That's just one example of the sort of thing that we store. But it's important for us to have a record of what decision was made, why it was made, when it was made, so that if we get challenged, we can say, this is what we've done. And rather than have a kind of open conversation every time, although we do talk about it, it's nice to have that in a structured, reliable way so that we can feel confident that we've done that in a way that works for us. Um, and so it is worth putting template in big letters because I know that I have been, or like, don't use this, make a copy kind of thing, because I know I have filled in the template version before. But using templates really helps us when we're making the same thing over and over again. And it helps the team, when we're establishing that template in the first place, making sure that we all have those shared understandings and agreements. So some examples of these things might be session notes. If some people always capture something but not other things, then it's hard to compare afterwards. Your attendance register, things like your photo consent, good news stories. That's a really nice case as well of like what our fundraiser always wants to know, like who did it and what happened and what changed. So whatever you want to make sure that you can look back on and remember is worth being in your template, and then things like your feedback form. Um, so yeah, where you can institute a template, I think it's nice and it saves people time in the long run. They don't have to start from scratch. Great. And then one other thing to think about here is just about surveys and, that sort of thing. I know that when we think about, yeah, we want more data, let's send out a survey for everyone. We heard from people that they were really bored of sending out surveys, and especially young people can't always be very reliable when they're filling in a survey because they're bored, they're tired, language differences change, they might not remember or know all of the information depending on their age. And so, yeah, we're saying not everything does need a survey. We're saying this as people who are asking you to fill in a survey after this training, but we think that this is a case where things do need a survey. I mentioned this earlier, but thinking about how conversations can be evidence, observations can be evidence, your other parts of your work, if they're well recorded, and you can access them and summarize them and that sort of thing, then they can be part of your learning about the sorts of things that otherwise you might sort of chuck into a survey. How was this useful? Blah, blah, blah. When you have regular connection with people, that regular connection can be part of your data collection as opposed to throwing another survey in. So yeah, some thoughts there on collecting data, how to build it in, some practical tips, some more ideas to think through. We'll have some time at the end for questions and discussion, but for now, you get a break from my voice and hand over to Zarino talking about storing data safely and sharing it.
Yeah, so this came up a couple of times when we were talking to different organisations. Some people are a little bit wary especially of sharing data, but even they were a bit worried about like what can we actually ask people for and how do we do it correctly. Yeah, if you go on to the next slide, Julia, the main thing that the main legislation that is going to affect you is GDPR. So this is the general privacy regulations, basically, and it's not actually the sort of death knell that people treat it as. All it really does is govern how you collect and store and use personal data. And it doesn't say that you can't do any of that. It just enforces certain ways of making sure that you can back up your decisions. And so this again might come back to the sorts of things Julia was talking about with the template like decision matrices and stuff, being able to say, oh no, we think actually we can collect this data because of this can be useful, and being able to point to that in the past. But generally you should be using data fairly, for in ways that people would expect, for clear purposes that you explain to them, and then you should keep it secure and only keep it for as long as you need it. And I think if you follow those kinds of rules of thumb, it is very unlikely that you'll get into hot water over anything data or privacy related, especially if you've taken clear, kind of justifiable decisions about how you do all of this stuff. I don't know whether anyone's ever looked at it or ever worried about this and looked up the guidance, but the ICO, who's the UK's Information Commissioner, they look after all sorts of privacy and data related issues at a national level. They've got some really clear, excellent guidance on their website about all sorts of aspects of this. And it covers non-profit organisations like yours, or profit-making ones, and all sorts of bits and pieces of how do you decide whether you're a data processor or a controller or whatever. It sort of demystifies a bunch of these terms. So we often end up referring to that ourselves when we're dealing with privacy issues on our websites. And they include, and I've pulled out an example here of one of the guides they've got for dealing with children's information. Generally, the guidance is the same as with adults' information, surprise, surprise. So complying with sensible data principles, using information fairly and in a way that they would expect, and considering harms as well as opportunities that could come out of the data. But there are always slight tweaks to this. So, for instance, depending on the types of people you work with, in your case, working with young people and children, you obviously need to be able to explain to them why you're collecting a certain thing, or you need to explain that to their parents and be able to communicate that so that you can collect something on their behalf. So there's two guides there. I've given the QR codes. You can scan those or follow the links in the slides that we send out after. But I just encourage people not to panic too much about we can't collect anything, because that sort of instills this kind of chilling effect, and then everybody's sort of working blind. I think some general rules of thumb for how to do this, as I've said, only collect what you need. I think every extra field can be a liability rather than an asset. Like if you're collecting stuff and you never actually use it, but there might be some sensitive data in there, then it's only one copy and paste away from someone accidentally sharing that somewhere they shouldn't have, or for it getting out of date because you're not actually actively using it, and then things are out of date within your database and it's a pain. So I think making sure you collect just what you need, again, helps you justify why you're collecting it. Well, we've thought about it, and this is the barest minimum we could do in order to deliver these sessions. So that's why we're collecting it. Being clear at the point of collection what you're going to use it for, and this again because you're working with young people, like being able to explain in plain English or in other languages that would make sense to the young people or their parents, like why you need to collect something. I think we've generally found that when you can explain this kind of stuff, people are more than happy to provide it. But I know a couple of you mentioned in the calls we had with you, like kids especially being a little bit wary of like, well, why do you need me to fill in my ethnicity? Like, can't you tell? And they think you're profiling them somehow. But often it sounds like from those examples that we heard in the interviews, like once you actually explain to people, well, we need to be able to keep running a thing like this, and to get the funding, we need to be able to show to people who don't know you, like that who you are roughly, and all of this is anonymized and blah blah blah. All we need is the top level numbers, and people are often at that point happy to share data. So it's worth asking. Um, I mentioned already kind of storing stuff securely and controlling access and deleting it when it's no longer needed. I think this can be really difficult to kind of keep on top of, especially getting rid of old data that you've said you'll only keep for a few years or whatever. But again, like working into maybe, as we'll be talking about in 2 weeks' time, like an annual kind of checklist of what have we collected over this year that we don't need anymore now that we've produced our end of year report, or are there things that we could summarize or anonymize so that it's no longer such potentially risky personal data, but it's still useful summary statistics for us to refer back to. And I will mention lawful basis. So this is again is a GDPR term, sorry, where you basically have to justify why you're collecting something. And people often get hooked up on consent, and we're so used to cookie warnings and banners and opting into things on websites and saying, yeah, okay, I'm happy for all these 1,000 organizations to use my browsing data. Yeah, just let me see the web page. Consent isn't the only way that you can collect information. There might be others that are more relevant in your situations. So things like legal obligations. So if your organization has a legal obligation to do something, then you don't need to ask consent to collect data about it. Protecting someone's life or safety. This comes into the safeguarding stuff. Often there might be data that you have to collect for safeguarding reasons. It might also be useful to you in other ways too, who knows? But you don't have to ask consent for that. And contracts as well, if you're obligated to collect something because of a contract, you should still ideally tell people what's being collected and allow them some way to opt out or ask for their data to be removed afterwards. But you don't need to ask them for consent up front in some of these cases. And I mentioned earlier anonymization and summarization of statistics, like to take individual, potentially risky data and turn it into something that you can maybe store a bit more easily and for a longer term. Generally, when we're talking about things like privacy regulations and GDPR, we're talking about personal information. And information that a motivated person can no longer identify an individual from isn't personal information anymore. So if you can do stuff to your data that you think generally somebody, even if they were trying to identify an individual from within that data set, couldn't do it anymore, then it's not personal data. And so you can generally be a bit freer about how you store that, what you do with it, and potentially who you share it with. Anonymizing information can be really hard, especially if you've got small samples, or people are able to triangulate different data sets. So compare statistics from different data sets or different spreadsheets or whatever that you're collecting, and then they can work out the overlap must be this particular person. Yeah, generally, it's often easier to summarize. I mean, like an example we came up with was like the wheelchair using Asian child who attends our Tuesday group. Like technically you haven't mentioned their name, but it's probably pretty obvious who they are if somebody actually compared those different populations. An easier approach is to summarize or aggregate the data, so report on patterns rather than individual records. I've given a couple of examples here, but they're generally things that you and your funders might actually find useful. They're kind of the difference between data or information and then insights or intelligence. It's like turning the raw materials of all these numbers over the years amongst all these people into a couple of statistics that we're able to share. And maybe that helps you tell your organization's story to other partners or funders, or maybe it helps you work out internally, strategically, what you should be doing next, or maybe it's something you could potentially share with other organizations in your area or elsewhere. And maybe you can all learn from each other. What's somebody doing well and not doing so well? And that's actually the final thing I'll mention in this section is the idea that once you have actually tried to, if possible, reduce this information down, so it's no longer personal information about individual kids, it's more sharing your learning about what you've delivered and what you found works and doesn't work and what the challenges are that you're facing. And if you can assign a number to those and combine them with some case studies or whatever, those are like when we've been talking to a couple of the organizations in our interviews, the ones that felt most confident about this were the ones who were somehow managing to do that. They pull in a couple of statistics, they pull in examples from the mouths of their service users, and they can demonstrate that they're solving a real problem and a real need. And we've seen similar stuff from My Society's work with the Climate Coalition, so in a completely different sector, not the youth sector, this time the climate and nature sector. And they found out we helped them build a data sharing platform where they could pull together sort of anonymized, aggregated information as a sector. And it helped them build a picture that no individual organization could do on its own. They all had one particular view of their members or their customers, their service users, or their area, and they didn't have access to equivalent data about other organizations or other areas. And that helped them answer questions like, where are we strong or weak, or where should we focus our efforts? So I think, not saying right now you need to go out and share all your data immediately, but I'd be interested to know maybe in the discussion at the end whether anyone on the call already does share this kind of data, and are there ways in which you wish you had access to some of this data? Like, would it help you do something? Because often you might have to be the first organization who's willing to share it in order for others to make use of it and share their equivalent. But yeah, I'll let's move on talking about like sharing data and doing stuff with it. Maybe on to Julia about turning some of this information into action.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Serena. And that is going to be a theme across our three sessions is, what can we do with this data? How can it improve our services and the way that we work? Both kind of externally, which is more of a section discussion next time, but also for the moment in our sort of day-to-day decision making. So now talking about not just collecting the data, but what we do with our data. So as well as earlier we talked about what kind of cadence and rhythm do we collect information and when does it make sense to do it at different times. We also want to think about reviewing and when we should look at this data and do anything with it. So things that make sense to review really regularly are safeguarding issues, immediate actions, attendance, that sort of thing. At my society, we have a kind of high risk call every 2 weeks, I think, about the things that we need to make a decision on, because that's really important. Monthly, broader emerging patterns. Are there things that you're kind of keeping your eye on that are the right time to review them then? Team discussion, good news stories. I'm part of a call at my society every 6 weeks, which is reviewing our partnership opportunities and like how different projects are going. Are there any new ones that we need to develop? And the kind of the data that feeds into that are updates from our existing projects, but also any sort of news that anyone's heard from elsewhere in the sector. And that seems like the right kind of rhythm for that kind of conversation. Quarterly is maybe bigger trends. Are we reaching the right young people? Are we meeting our objectives? We heard a really nice example from somebody say that they were reviewing their information and they noticed that it was Bangladeshi women weren't coming as much as they used to do, and it was because the timing of a certain kind of session had changed in a way that conflicted with something else, and so then they could kind of address that. And I think that that came up at like a broader kind of meeting and analysis. But those sort of bigger questions, I think if you don't schedule time to think through them, you're so busy on the hamster wheel that it can be easy to forget. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, actually our attendance has dropped. And so I think building in those opportunities to reflect and choosing the right question for the right moment is really nice. And next time we are talking about this kind of annual stock check, annual report, and how we would, plan the next year and do that sort of thing. So come along in 2 weeks' time to hear more about that. And this feeds into what we might call a kind of learning cycle where we're collecting data and we're trying to find these lightweight but robust systems for collecting data. We're storing them in ways that are like safe and manageable. And then we are reviewing that data, discussing it with our team with, not with the relevant people for that area, and making some decisions. And so the decisions here may well be a path down, as I've said, changing a program or a project in a certain way, applying for new funding, changing something up. But one of those decisions might be, let's summarize, anonymize, and delete this, like Zarina's just been talking about. And so we're just wanting to touch base with our data and how we're storing it and how it's working for us. Because at that kind of review stage might be exactly when you're like, oh, we've collected all this, got no idea what to do with it. Maybe we don't need to collect this in future. Or it might make you think, the gap here is we know that people are more confident, but we're not sure they've actually learned something or changed something. Um, so that opportunity to kind of discuss, decide, and change is, yeah, I think is the whole point of doing this, so that we can be reflective in our work. So just some examples here. If attendance really drops, what might be the causes of that? And then you could go and have it, conversations that are casual conversations with your attendees being like, oh, or if you just spot somebody say, oh, you haven't seen you there for a while, what's happened? It might be a session timing problem, so that can change. So not everything has to be formal. You might have formal data that you then take a kind of informal step to fill in the gaps for and then make a change. But that kind of data collection in the first place helps you spot these trends. If that you've noticed more young people asking about employment, maybe careers as an option. No one's completing the surveys, switch out the surveys, do something else. So just some examples here of the different changes you might make and the ways of spotting things. Again, I know this has to be considered in the context, and if you're changing things every 2 weeks, your staff will be like, not again, I've only just got used to the last system. And so it's worth thinking through, as we talked in the last slide a couple of slides ago, about that cadence of, when you're making the decisions, spotting things, what changes to make. But I think it is worth viewing these things so that we can do things with our data. And yeah, we had a really nice example here actually that somebody told us in one of our interviews that the attendance had dropped amongst a particular age group in the school. Sorry, a particular age group in I think it was a football club or something like that. The staff spoke to the young people to understand what was going on, and it was all about their moving to secondary school and the changes in the timetable and that sort of thing. And so they changed up what they were offering, the timing of it, and tried to fit in more with what was really happening on the ground. And I think that really worked. So, we have a little chat activity here, where we can have a little break. If you'd like to say out loud or in the chat, is there something that you've noticed and then made a change as a result and what happened? Or something that you've noticed but you're not yet sure how to change? We could also come back to this right at the end once we've gone through the AI stuff, Serena. What do you think? Or is it nice to have
I
a
think give
pause
people
now?
a couple of minutes,
Yeah.
and you can take a swig of water as well.
Da, 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 da. I always
Yeah,
do. I had to do. Yeah, I'm always going 100 miles an
yeah,
hour.
yeah.
Um,
Intrigued to know whether anything comes to mind immediately for anyone where you've noticed something in your reporting or your data, and you've changed as a result, or yeah, you're
Because
not
it
sure
might,
what to do.
one of the other things that we heard in the interviews was it might not be that you're changing things, but your community around you is changing for various reasons. And so, and wanting to kind of reflect that change in demographic around you. So it might not even be your own data, it might be a situation that's around you, or like, yeah, some other community centre or workplace or whatever it is changed their timetable and how you reflect and adjust on that. Um, yeah, I'll just give people a minute or two, but no pressure if nothing's immediately springing to mind. It's just always nice to hear real life examples. Um, and yeah, happy to hear if it's a change that you're not sure what to do with yet, or that you're just monitoring. Okie dokie. Well,
Oh,
oh,
Vanessa says we purchased an expensive online data monitor and it failed as the staff found it too complicated. Yeah, I know it's tricky. I
yeah,
think
that.
this actually ties into something I had in the back of my mind as Julia was talking here. Is sometimes a way to approach these things is often to sort of position them as an experiment rather than a permanent change. To say, look, we've noticed this thing. We think maybe this metric should be going up instead of down or whatever. We feel like these people aren't being served by this particular thing. So we're going to try this change, but we're only going to do it for the next 6 weeks, and then we'll check in 6 weeks' time and see whether it's solved it or not. And I think that can often buy you a bit of goodwill from people, that they think, oh, well, it's not a permanent change then, and it's obvious how you're going to measure whether it's been a success or not. And if it doesn't improve anything, we'll go back to how we were doing it before. Like that, we often use that internally in our charity as like a sort of easy way to instill a bit of change without everybody feeling like, oh my God, who are you to introduce this new way of us working on this thing? We don't even know whether it will work yet. So that can be useful. It is difficult though if it does mean you have to like buy a bit of equipment first to be able to test out the thing. But yeah, maybe there's ways, if this ever happens again, where there's like a temporarily there's a way you could try and collect that data in some slightly janky way, and then eventually buy the nice piece of kit that would do it for you or something. Once you've made the case to prove that actually this thing would help or would work. I don't know whether that applies in that particular situation, but yeah.
Yeah, I really resonate with Vanessa's point, and I had a similar situation somewhere else I used to work where people weren't so techie, because at my society is very techie and we can make systems that work for us. But we bought a kind of like out of the box piece of sort of software to do our reporting, but we couldn't do the little tweaks and changes that made it useful to us to ask the useful things. And it was just a tiny bit too clunky to make it work. And so I think there is something in there as well about, is your data system flexible enough that not like that non-specialist people can
Mm.
change it to fit your needs? Because otherwise, yeah, it's a bit overwhelming. Um, oh, Shabana, thank you so much. Really helpful. Yeah, informal chat to suggestion box. Conversation about ideas on activities with a young person is now recorded. I love that. Yeah, that's really, really great to
Yeah.
hear. Because I think also, I know we often think that funders want to hear like really, really hard facts and data. But some of those facts, for example, off the top of my head, might be 80% of our youth workers noticed or recorded such and such, like the recording of the source of the data can be your staff and observations. They don't have to be 70% of young people told us, because we know how hard it is to hear from young
Mm.
people. So yeah, Google, we're mostly a Google organization, and I think talking about customizing tools, I think some of those are working for people. Great, that's so helpful. Brill. So, we've got 10 minutes to talk about AI and to wrap
Yeah.
up, which I think is about the right timing.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be 2026 if we didn't talk about AI at some point. I'm going to keep this super short. Lots of people probably already know a little bit of this. It was a thing that came up in a couple of the conversations we had with the youth organisations over the last month or two, and generally people were like, "I've sort of started experimenting, but I'm not really confident about it, and I don't really know how I should be using it, and I'm a bit worried that it's sort of." Like I wouldn't want to run it on any of our data, or I'm not sure whether I should be uploading any of our data to it or whatever. And I think basically all of you are doing fine. Like whether you feel you weren't using it confidently or whatever, it's okay, because this whole landscape is changing pretty much every couple of months. And being cautious isn't the same as falling behind. So AI tools are evolving all the time. Best practice is barely keeping up. So generally, it's the organisations that kind of rush in that end up getting burnt. They end up doing something that they then later regret. So you can be careful and make good use of this. Um, as a really quick primer for anybody, I am by no means an AI expert, but as a quick, in a nutshell, explanation of what AI really is. Generative AI, so things like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Copilot, are just very sophisticated pattern predictors. So if I said something like knock knock, the response that people say in their head or out loud is who's there? And that is basically you recognizing a pattern. You're working out which words follow the words I gave you. And that's just what AI does. So they're really good at guessing the most likely next chunk of words. They don't think, they don't even really understand the words they're giving to you. They understand the words in more of a probabilistic, mathematical way than the actual concepts or linguistics of what they're giving you. They just know most likely next word in the sentence would be this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then at the end of it, you've got a big essay. It also doesn't know what's real and what's imagined. It's not an encyclopedia, and it's not really a search engine, although some of them nowadays do perform like a Google search under the hood and then sort of summarize the results for you. And Google obviously builds something into the top of its search, which whatever. But as if any of you have ever used it or relied on any of those, you will have realized that it is often not correct. So the problem is that means it can confidently state very plausible sounding facts that are completely made up. So don't rely on it being correct. Um, so what not to do with AI is use it in situations where you are relying on it being factually correct. Um, Also, I guess a fairly relevant thing for you folks, given I just talked about privacy and data protection, please try not to paste like young people's personal data into public AI tools. I know it can feel like this is like your special secure place within the AI, but sometimes in these, especially the free tools, they're learning from what people paste into them. And it's really hard to predict how particular information you supply sort of gets factored into the model and then pops out somewhere else. Um, and you also don't really know where or for how long that information is being stored. So if you're going doing your GDPR stuff very conscientiously by the book, and you're like making sure you tell people how long you're storing everything and where you're storing it, if you're also then just feeding all of your session notes into some AI, it's really difficult for you to be able to say where that even is and how it might be used. But there are some examples of places that AI genuinely can help. So generally, the answer is anywhere that this kind of pattern matching is an asset. So, summarizing long documents or pulling core themes out of written notes, especially when there's no right answer. So, when you're not actually trying to find a factual answer as to how many kids have this particular problem or how many sessions did we do where this was an issue, if you're just trying to get a rough feel for something out of a bunch of documents, then maybe AI can help you with that and save you some time on it. You might need to go back and check it, or maybe if you're only looking for a rough idea, it's good enough. Likewise, I've used an example here of like using an AI for some inspiration or some blue sky thinking, like where you're not having to rely on the output, and it's really just to sort of jog your mind. In my society is primarily a technology charity, and in the tech world, we have this idea of rubber ducking, where you talk to a rubber duck that is on the top of your screen, and you'll often find that it helps you just talking through the problem helps you realize something you missed or a problem you didn't spot. And so maybe the AI can help you come up with session plans based on your stated goals, or finding ways to phrase things for young people because things are all riz and all sorts that I don't understand anymore. And so maybe that can help. And I think the other thing is anywhere you need help building a tool that will help you analyze your data. So rather than getting the AI to analyze the data for you, and you're basically chucking all this data into a black box and you've got no idea how it came up with the answers it gives you, maybe you can ask the AI to help you write the formulas in your Google spreadsheet or whatever to get you the answers you want. And not only would you actually start learning how to do those formulas yourself, but you've got a nice paper trail to be able to work out how the numbers were come up with, and you'll be able to adjust them and edit them over time, and sort of maybe it might become a tool that you can reuse again and again. So I've often found a couple of somebody mentioned Google earlier. I think Google Gemini within Google Sheets is really good for this kind of thing of like saying, what would I do in this cell to be able to add up all of these, or to be able to work out the average over that time or whatever. Then it can help you in ways like that. But yeah, generally, as I said, don't stress about it. Just keep in mind, try not to put too much or any, ideally, kind of personal data into these things, and use it in places where this kind of free-form thinking is helpful to you. And I think
I
that is it,
Yeah,
right, Julie?
that's brilliant, Serena. Thank you so much. I've got an example for everyone here. I actually was putting into one of the chatbots the other day. We are planning a webinar, and I was thinking, oh, have I got all of the right speakers here? Like maybe there are some speakers that I'm missing. And so in that blue sky thinking, I said, the topic of the webinar is this. Give me a long list of speakers I could have. And out of them, one of them was really relevant. I hadn't come across. Brilliant. I thought, amazing. I'll go and get in touch with them. Fantastic. Someone else had sadly died, and the AI just didn't know this. And so this person was sadly no longer available to come and be invited to this webinar. Would have been really good, but is no longer with us. And so, yes, useful in some ways, not useful in others. And I had to keep prompting it and be like, I think there's maybe a problem with this person. And it really didn't know. It couldn't match that bit of the internet where there were sadly, you know, tributes to this person, with them really existing. And so, yes. A real mixed bag to this day. But I think that was a really, really helpful summary. Um, Great. Okay. So we're time to wrap up. Just so you know, our next session is going to be about understanding and sharing your impact. So we're talking about an annual stock check, what you can learn from that in that way that you can't get to in the day-to-day level that we've been talking about today, what makes for a great annual report, and we're actually going to give you the opportunity to dig around My Society's annual report that is being released the same week. And so we'll have a little look at, you can check if we are the right people to be giving this information and this advice. And then we're going to get a bit more into this idea about sharing data and really doing something with it, learning from it. And so you'll get a sneak peek at our prototype youth data hubs that Zarina has been building. And that's not with information yet from any organizations that we've spoken to. It's from like national data and other sources, but just try to get a sense of what's going on in different places. It allows you to kind of zoom in at a constituency level and a council level and see how trends are happening. So we'll give you a sneak peek of that, which will also be coming up in our final session. So, last slide from us is please do fill in our survey. I will put the link in, or actually, Zarina, would you be able to put the link in the chat?
Yes, I will do
Thank you
that.
so
Yeah.
much. But there is also a QR code there. You could probably fill it in by 2 minutes past 3. It's really just a short few questions, just to help us check that we're saying things that are helpful and interesting to people. Um, and yeah, this will be open to people who watch the recording as well. And to say thank you for just being here, spending an hour with us. There is a voucher or donation. We're going to process those at the end of the 3 webinars, but if you tell us now what you want, then that'll help us process them. Um, and yes, the 2-page guide that I mentioned, so that has the key information from this just on 2 sides of A4, is also linked there. But you'll get an email from me this afternoon, which has the slides on it, the survey, and the 2-page guide. So yeah, that is everything. Brill. Thank you, Zarina, for sending that. Um, we've got a minute to spare, and then everyone can go and have a big cold glass of water. I'm going to stand in front of my fan and cool off a bit. Um, Hopefully, see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you ever so much. Really glad you found it interesting, Liz. Thank you. And yeah, have a brilliant rest of your day. Hopefully, see you in 2 weeks. Hopefully, it will be in more normal temperature by then. We'll have to see. Thank you so much. See you all very soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, thank you. Great. I will end our meeting.